Samuel.
We are back to 1 Samuel chapter 14, and we had left off Wednesday at verse 24, and we will finish up this chapter tonight. All right, now as you will recall, the earlier part of the chapter, it tells us that Jonathan and his armor bearer had snuck off, and just between the two of them had managed to kill 20 of the Philistines in a small field no bigger than about an acre or so. And now they are on their way back, now that Saul has figured out that they're the two that's missing, although I'm sure that they were unaware that Saul had an accountability formation. But we pick up with verse 24. It says, "Now the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man who eats food before evening, and until I have avenged myself on my enemies.' So none of the people tasted food." Now, if you know anything at all about the physical requirements of warfare, you know that what Saul did here was about as dumb as anything you can imagine. He has told his priest not to bother offering the sacrifice, and instead has declared that he would curse anyone in his army that dared have anything to eat that day. Now, that in itself is dumb enough, but to tell you where Saul's mind is, notice that he says the reason for this is that, he says, "until I have avenged myself on my enemies." It's all about Saul. Doesn't say anything about Israel or God. It's about my enemies. Now, I can tell you that the average adult male during normal combat conditions, now what I'm telling you, of course, this is modern combat. What they were doing here is a whole lot more physical than, trudging through the woods or whatever with modern weapons. So whatever I'm telling you now, you can probably add to that. But the average adult male is believed to consume somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day during normal combat conditions. So you figure these men who were carrying whatever they had, they're on foot, and they're fighting their war not with rifles and artillery and what have you, but with swords, spears, arrows. Seriously, a physical, taxing combat. So probably as many as 6,000 or 7,000 calories. And they're being told not to eat anything. Now, the other part of this is, does Saul have the spiritual authority to declare a curse on anybody?
No.
He doesn't. That's not his ability to do that. But nevertheless, he's the king, and when word gets out that the king has declared no man will eat anything until, tonight, or until we win this battle, whichever comes first. There was that one says, "and until I have avenged myself on my enemies." So
that might not be until tomorrow.
That's true. That might not have even been that day at all. So obviously they were worn out, they were hungry, and probably, I would venture to say none of them were diabetics, because back then if you were diabetic you didn't live long. But probably still would have had a few of them in there whose blood sugar might have been getting a little low. And that's the condition they're in. It said, verse 25, it said, and all the people of the land entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. Now, I looked this up, and apparently in that area of the world, while we tend to think of honeys as, wild bees, nesting, up in hollow trees and places like that, apparently there's a species of honeybee in that area that tends to nest in holes in the ground and what have you.
Rocks, because they hardly had any trees.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Well, but there would have been trees there because notice where it was. Said they entered the forest.
Yeah, but okay. So we were in a forest, so there were
They
some
were in a
trees.
forest there.
But it still makes sense that they would have a species of ground bee in an arid land.
Now around here, anything buzzing in the ground, I'd be running from because around here that's usually yellow jackets. But anyway, it says, when the people entered the forest, behold, there was a flow of honey, but no man put a hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. Now, why do you suppose there would be honey oozing out of this nest on the ground? Well, you figured if a whole army of men had just been trudging by and this bee's nest is on the ground somewhere, somebody probably kicked this nest, which of course also would mean there'd be bees buzzing all over the place. But what's that?
Raising Cain with everybody.
Yeah, so I'm sure probably some of them had to run from it. But even afterward, apparently it was a big enough nest that, or hive I should say, that there's honey freely available there on the ground, and they were afraid to eat any of it. By the way, now I'm going to chase this little short rabbit hole here. How did God describe the promised land?
Milk and honey.
A land flowing with milk and honey.
And here's honey flowing out of the ground.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Not something we see here. But Jonathan, this is verse 27, but Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under oath. Therefore, he put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. By the way, his eyes brightened is a Hebrew euphemism for just saying he felt better. He had something to eat, a little bit of energy. Also, what else do we see about verse 27 that tells us this occurred here?
Jonathan's has returned,
Yeah, Jonathan and his armor bearer got back home.
but not in time to hear the oath.
Not in time to hear the oath, but also they would have gotten back and basically let it be known that, hey, we just assassinated 20 of those Philistines and they're running for their lives. We need to go get them. Which might have also indicated to us why Saul was in such a hurry if they got back and he got the report from Jonathan as to what happened. Might explain to us why Saul is basically thinking, we got to go now.
No time for the sacrifice.
No time for the sacrifice. Verse 28 says, then one of the people answered and said, your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food today. And the people were weary. And Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See now how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little of this honey. Now, verse 29 tells us that even Jonathan recognizes that his father's not really that bright. And he says, my father's troubled the land. That's the Hebrew word that is used there. Basically means my dad's causing some problems.
My dad screwed up.
He goofed up. How much more if only the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great. Jonathan's thinking if we'd have had a little more energy to pursue these guys, we could have just had a total rout here, but we're getting tired, we're hungry. This is what my dad has caused here. What could have been an outright overwhelming victory on our part Well, the Philistines are getting away because we just don't have the energy to keep going. Verse 31 says, and they struck among the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very weary. That's at least twice now that we've been told this. You think maybe that Samuel, the biblical writer here, is trying to give us a message? He says twice in the space of about 3 verses, soldiers were tired.
And it drives them to do something bad in the next verse.
Yeah. Verse 32, and the people rushed greedily upon the spoil, and took sheep and oxen and calves, and slew them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Now, what does this tell you about the time now?
Evening.
Yeah, sun's probably gone down, and they stopped, by the way, because of course back then, you didn't, normally, except under a surprise attack or some special event, you didn't conduct your warfare at night because you couldn't see. So this tells us the sun's gone down, the Philistines have gotten away, and now they're chasing down whatever of the Philistines' cattle and sheep that they can manage to round up, and are just slaughtering them right there. And they are so hungry. Of course, under the law of Moses, they were required, what's that?
Drain the blood.
Yeah, they were required basically, if they were, say, slaughtering a sheep, you slit its throat and hung it up, just like you see deer hunters do when they shoot a deer, and just let it sit there for a while until the blood drains out. And then you dressed it and cooked it. Well, they're apparently just slaughtering it right there, cutting off a slab of meat. Now, what we don't know is, are they eating it raw or are they cooking it? We don't know. I suspect they may have been eating raw meat. Because otherwise, if they were cooking it, even if the blood were still in it, what would probably happen?
Blood would boil out.
Yeah. It would still, burn the blood off. The fact that they're being accused now of eating their spoil with the blood still in it kind of tells me they were butchering these animals and eating the meat raw. What's that?
They were hungry.
They were hungry. Verse 33, then they told Saul, saying, behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. And he said, you have acted treacherously. Roll a great stone to me today.
What does that mean?
What's that?
That line, roll a great stone to me today. I'm very confused by that. It makes no sense to me.
It will make sense here in a minute if you just see what happens next.
Okay.
It says, and Saul said, disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, each one of you bring me his ox or his sheep, and slaughter it here and eat, and do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. So all the people that night brought each one his ox with him and slaughtered it there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Now, what you see is, now first off, let me mention this. Notice they go to Saul and say the people are sinning. Now, do you think Saul already knew what was going on?
Yeah.
So the fact that somebody had to bring it to Saul's attention that this was wrong, Saul was not conversed or versed enough with the law of Moses to realize that for them to be eating this raw meat with it still bloody, that was not an appropriate thing to do. And that's when, so he's got to be told this. Now, to his credit, he does at least put a stop to it. That's when he calls for this big rock to be rolled over.
To be the altar.
Well, two things. He made a makeshift altar with it, and he used that big rock to say, slaughter your animal, throw it up here on this rock, and let it lay there until the blood drains off of it. Now you getting the idea? Yeah. They were using that as their basically their slaughterhouse. But it's just the fact that Saul had to be told this to realize that what was going on was wrong. So Saul, just one mistake after another. Now verse 36 says, and Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and take spoil among them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them. And they said, do whatever seems good to you. So the priest said, let us draw near to God here. Now, why do you suppose the priest has intervened at this point? Well, the priest knows, number one, you never offered a sacrifice to begin with. And now you're here slaughtering all of these animals. At some point, we need to have a formal ritualized sacrifice. The priest is, this Ajalon is smart enough to realize that what we're doing here, while there's nothing illegal about the way they were slaughtering the animals now, no sacrifice still has yet to be made.
And Saul was ready to go running off
and Saul's ready to, like, okay, we got something to eat now. Let's go chase them some more in the middle of the night. So,
is there a time frame for sacrifices usually, or is it
actually under normal circumstances? Yes, yeah. They would offer a morning sacrifice at 3, an afternoon a morning one at 9, an afternoon sacrifice at 3. But in special occasions like this, they could offer a sacrifice at any time.
Okay.
There wouldn't be anything wrong with that, as long as it was done properly.
Yeah, I just was curious.
And the priest here knows no sacrifice has been offered.
Yeah.
And he sees Saul getting antsy to want to run off in the middle of the night and chase him some more. But the fact that Saul doesn't get what he wants out of this just tells us again that Saul's not getting the message. Look at verse 37. And Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But he did not answer him on that day. Now, how do you think Saul inquired of God? Well, notice the priest has just approached Saul and said, we haven't had a sacrifice yet. Now, we're told about a chapter or 2 earlier, what was the priest wearing all this time?
An ephod.
An ephod. Now, what was very peculiar about the ephod of the high priest?
The stones.
Yeah, it had what's called the Urim and the Thummim, which we know were some kind of stones. Now, even Jews today have absolutely no idea, and believe it or not, the Bible nowhere tells us how this worked. It tells us that they had this Urim and Thummim, and we know that those were the stones, or what the stones were called, that were on the priest's ephod. There were 12 of them, one for each tribe of Israel. Some people believe, and again, this is all speculation, there are some that believe that if they would inquire of God, that God would miraculously cause one or the other of those stones on the ephod of the priest to glow. One was a yes, one was a no, and occasionally another one would glow that would be a wait or a, not yet, or some, however they would interpret it there. Again, that's speculation. Nobody knows for sure, not even the Jews today.
I was reading in the Unseen Realm this morning, Dr. Michael Heiser's book, that throughout Eastern Mesopotamian area cultures, luminescence was considered a sign of divinity. So,
and that's one of the reasons why they think
stone glowing would have been the sign of the divine intervention to give you the message of which is the correct action.
Exactly. So that, again, that would, if that's what God did, that would, go in accordance with that. All I'm saying is that we don't know for sure. The Bible doesn't tell us. Just says that however it worked, that's how God sometimes would speak to them through the high priest. Now, the fact that he does this through the high priest, what does that tell us that, or who is not present during all of this?
Saul.
Yeah.
Samuel.
Samuel didn't need an Urim and Thummim. God just spoke to him and said, tell him this. Well, obviously the fact that Samuel's not there, they couldn't inquire of Samuel, so he goes through the high priest, which was appropriate, but they get no answer. Nothing. Now, why do you suppose God chose not to answer Saul? Well, because Saul launched this whole campaign without a proper sacrifice, without inquiring of God. And so God gives Saul exactly pretty much what he's asking for. Nothing.
You're on your own.
Yep, you're on your own.
You struck off on your own, so now you're on your own.
You're on your own. Mm-hmm. So we get verse 38. It says, and Saul said, draw near here, all you chiefs of the people, and investigate and see how this sin has happened today. When Saul assumes that there must be a sin going on, when they know we've already put a stop to the improper slaughtering of cattle, the only sin that has occurred so far is that Saul launched a military campaign without offering the proper sacrifice. So if there is a sin, it's on Saul. But Saul doesn't see that, so he assumes, well, something has happened. So he calls all the leaders of the people together and said, well, we're going to find out what sin occurred. Verse 39 says, for as the Lord lives, who delivers Israel, though it is in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But not one of all the people answered him. In other words, he's assuming somebody's sin. Couldn't be me, he said, but even if it's my firstborn son Jonathan, whoever did this, he's going to die. We're going to kill him right here. So Saul assumes it's not him. Then he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. And the people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. In other words, they're basically placating him. It's like, well, okay, king, do whatever you want to do.
You do you, King.
We're just, you can tell at this point, they're not willing to back the king down. They're just, okay, king, if that's what you want. Therefore, Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, give a perfect lot. And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. In other words, rather than inquiring of the high priest, now he's resorted to casting lots. Throws the lots on the ground, and apparently when the dice got rolled, it came up and said, well, it's not the people, it's you. And Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan my son. And Jonathan was taken. Now, here's the problem. Did Jonathan sin and God is telling Saul Jonathan has committed a sin? Or in view of the fact that this is a 50-50 roll of the dice, does it just happen to be that by the mere, probability, the dice get rolled and it turns out to be pointing at Jonathan? We're not told this. So we don't know if God's directing this process or if this is just pure, luck.
I think God's directing it. Because
Could
God
be.
wanted Saul to see his folly.
Well,
He's not letting Saul know that Jonathan's the one who sinned because Jonathan didn't sin.
but here's the other possibility.
But he's leading Saul to the realization of his own folly.
But here's the thing that I would wonder about is if God was actually directing this process, that lot ought to be pointing at Saul.
Yeah, he's just backed off.
And as you say, Jonathan did not sin. Jonathan didn't do anything wrong, which makes me wonder if this is if God has just withdrawn his hand at this point and God's just sitting there watching, and that this is just by mere chance. Bottom line is, we won't know. Bible doesn't tell us. Just tells us what happened. Verse 43, then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. So Jonathan told him and said, I indeed tasted a little honey with the end of the staff that is in my hand. Here I am, I must die. And Saul said, may God do this to me and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan. Now, this ought to tell you how stupid Saul is. Jonathan basically is saying, I didn't know anything about any oath that you put people under, but yep, I had something to eat. I ate some of that honey, so I guess I got to die. And Saul, for his own firstborn son, says, yep, we're going to kill you because of something I said and you didn't know anything about, but yep, you're going to die. I think this is just the most ridiculous foolishness that Saul could have possibly come up with. But as we see, Jonathan had both the people and God on his side. So verse 45, but the people said to Saul, must Jonathan die who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. So what do you see happen here? Basically, the people realized that Saul is being stupid here, and they come to Jonathan's defense and say, no, you're not killing him. It's because of him that we had this victory today, and you're not touching him. Now, Saul is their first king. And right off the bat, he was popular, but notice how quickly he has gone from being hailed as the new king, that, long live the king, to now they are openly defying him.
It seems pretty amazing to me how quickly they went from trembling in fear from the oath that he swore and the curse that he leveled to disobeying him and revolting against his decree.
Because they realized what a dope he was
Yeah,
in the first
yeah.
place. 0 to 0.
Yeah, I think Saul at this point has just totally disgraced himself, and that he has lost, in just a matter of probably days, has lost the loyalty of the people. And they realize just how dumb he is.
What they asked for.
But he's a good warrior.
So, at this point, in verse 46, it says basically that was it for the day. The Philistines kept going and they went home, and the Israelites went home. Now, verse 47, and we'll finish up this chapter and then we'll be done for the night. It says, now, when Saul had taken the kingdom over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab. Now, you'll recall Moab is due east of Israel. The sons of Ammon, they would have been northeast. Edom, they're south. The kings of Zobah, they're north. And the Philistines would have been to the southwest. And wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment. So at this point, it does say that Saul continued to be victorious and put down all the Israelite enemies in all directions. North, south, east, west. He, at least from this point on, was able to secure Israelite victories. Now, what has changed here? Prior to this, at the beginning of Saul's reign, notice the Israelites had nothing but stone tools and, no swords, nothing of any, no weaponry that would provide them with any kind of victory. What has changed at this point?
Plunder.
Yeah. They still probably don't have any blacksmiths or anybody that can make swords. But in this rout of the Philistines, they basically plundered all the Philistines' weapons, which would now give them metal, swords and spears, and possibly some chariots and horses. Something that just a year or so before they didn't have. Verse 48 says, he acted valiantly and defeated the Amalekites and delivered Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. Now, the Amalekites were not enemies that were around them. Keep in mind, the Amalekites lived in Canaan. They were among those that the Israelites were told to get rid of. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan and Ishvi and Malchishua, and the names of his 2 daughters were these. The names of the firstborn, Merab, and the name of the younger, Michal. By the way, Saul's youngest daughter, who David ultimately married, is not Michal. It's Michal. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Himaaz, and the name of the captain of his army was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. What does that make Abner?
Cousin.
Yeah, Saul's cousin. And Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. Now the war against the Philistines was severe all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any mighty man or any valiant man, he attached him to his staff. So Saul was victorious of all these other places, but the one that was constantly the irritant was the Philistines. And the reason for it were the Philistines were the ones that, as far as their weaponry and their technology, they were more advanced than all the rest of them. The Philistines were the ones that had the blacksmiths and had an advanced metallurgical science.
Weren't they the descendants of the sea peoples?
Possibly. It's interesting, though, that, by the way, I'll mention this before we close for the night. There have been people recently that have tried to equate the so-called Palestinians with the Philistines, because it both starts with a P. The names sort of sound familiar, and people, the Palestinians are just the descendants of the ancient Philistines. No, there is absolutely no, blood relationship between the Palestinians and the Philistines at all. The Philistines got wiped out, centuries ago. The Palestinians are just Arabs that, in fact, if you go back in 100 years of history for Palestine, there's no such thing as a Palestinian.
The British created it.
Yeah, that's basically that's an Arab who lived in what is now Israel that took the name Palestinian. So again, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. They're just descendants of the Arabs, and there weren't any before the last 80 years.
Yeah, their land taken from them in Israel.
Yeah, and all of those folks that say, "Oh, Israelis have no right to be there. It's Palestine and it belonged to them." No, it didn't. The Jews were there several thousand years before there ever was such a thing as a Palestinian.
Or an Arab.
Or an Arab. All right, questions this evening? All right.